There are seasons in life that feel like walking up a mountain covered in fog. You keep moving, but you cannot clearly see where the path leads. There is no voice beside you saying, "Keep going." No one waiting at the top. No applause echoing back to remind you that your effort matters. It is just you, the silence, and the weight of your own steps. Because as much as people talk about discipline, strength, and self-belief, most of us still carry a quiet hope that someone will notice. Someone will understand how hard this has been. Someone will see the inner battles, the ones no one else could possibly measure, the nights you kept going when you wanted to collapse, the mornings you got up without motivation, the promises you kept to yourself even when there was no reward for keeping them. But sometimes no one comes. No one says they are proud of you. And in that absence, a painful question begins to rise. Is it still worth continuing if no one witnesses it? That is one of the deepest psychological tests a person can face, because when the outer world grows silent, you are forced to confront the place inside yourself that still longs to be confirmed. You begin to see how much of your energy may have been tied to being recognized, encouraged, mirrored back by others. And when that mirror disappears, it can feel as though part of you disappears with it. But this is also where something extraordinary can begin. Carl Jung once suggested that every true rebirth begins with a kind of dissolution. The old structure weakens, the familiar forms fall away, the supports you once leaned on no longer hold you in the same way. And while that feels like loss at first, it may actually be preparation. Because when there is no one left to lean on, another possibility opens. You begin, slowly and painfully, to become your own source of strength. Not the kind that needs to be seen, but the kind that forms in silence. The kind that does not depend on applause, approval, or reassurance. A deeper strength. A quieter one. The kind that emerges when you keep walking, not because someone is watching, but because something essential inside you refuses to stop. That is what this journey is about. Not how to become hard, not how to stop feeling pain, but how to rise when no one is standing beside you. How to stop waiting for rescue and begin discovering that what you needed most was never outside you to begin with. Because there comes a moment in every real transformation when you realize a truth that changes everything. What you were seeking in the outer world, strength, love, peace, direction, was never missing. It was sleeping within you. And the silence you feared may be the very place where it begins to wake up. Loneliness is one of the few experiences that strips life down to its bare structure. There comes a point when the world around you begins to feel strangely distant. The conversations that once held your attention no longer carry the same life. People you used to feel close to seem farther away, even if nothing obvious has happened. On the surface, your life may still look the same. You go to work, you answer messages, you show up where you are expected to show up. But inwardly, something has shifted. You can feel it, even if you cannot yet explain it. Carl Jung believed that this kind of loneliness is not always a problem to be solved. Sometimes it is the beginning of transformation. He spoke of what might be called the night sea journey, the dark passage in which a person can no longer fully belong to the old world, yet has not yet stepped into the new one. This is why loneliness can feel so unsettling. It is not merely the absence of people, it is the absence of resonance. The things that once anchored you no longer reach you in the same way. You are still present in your life, but your soul has begun to withdraw from what is no longer true for it. That is why this stage is so often misunderstood. Most people assume loneliness means something has gone wrong. They rush to fill it with noise, work, relationships, entertainment, anything that can keep them from hearing the silence. But Jung would say that this silence is not empty. It is the first place where the self begins to speak. A woman I once knew entered this stage after a difficult divorce. For years, she had been surrounded by motion, social plans, obligations, and familiar routines. When everything collapsed, the silence of her apartment frightened her. She said it felt as if the walls themselves were asking questions she had avoided for years. At first, she tried to outrun it, but eventually she stopped. She began sitting quietly, first for a few minutes, then for longer stretches. She cooked for herself, wrote in a journal, read in the evening without music or television. Months later, she told me, "I thought silence was where I would disappear. But it turned out to be the first place I could hear myself." It removes distraction so that something deeper can come forward. Jung believed a person only truly matures when they are willing to encounter themselves without witnesses, not when they are admired, not when they are understood, but when the outer world goes quiet, and they are left with no one to lean on but their own inner life. In that sense, loneliness is not punishment. It is training. It is the winter of the soul, the season in which old leaves fall and roots deepen in darkness. And just like an oak tree in winter appears still while something vital is happening below the surface, the lonely phases of life may be the very seasons in which your deepest strength is being formed. So if you are in that place now, do not assume you are lost. You may simply be entering the first chamber of real growth. It is the expectation that someone else should remove the feeling for you. That is the next stage of the journey. After the first shock of solitude, after the silence has forced you to confront yourself, a deeper realization begins to emerge. What drains you is not always being alone, but the constant hope that someone else will come and make you feel whole again. A message, a reassurance, a voice that says, you matter, you're safe, you're not forgotten. Carl Jung understood that this longing is deeply human, but he also saw that when emotional stability depends too heavily on another person's response, the self remains underdeveloped. The immature ego needs constant reflection from outside in order to feel real. It says, if you answer me, I exist. If you comfort me, I am okay. If you choose me, I have value. And when that response does not come, the entire inner structure begins to shake. A woman once described this to me with painful honesty. She said that whenever her partner took too long to respond to a message, her mind immediately spiraled. She checked her phone over and over. She imagined rejection, abandonment, betrayal. She knew it was disproportionate, but she could not stop. Over time, she realized that her fear had very little to do with him. It came from much earlier. As a child, whenever she was upset, the people around her dismissed it or withdrew. Her nervous system had learned a brutal lesson. My feelings do not matter unless someone else confirms them. So as an adult, she kept searching for a person who could finally reverse that old wound. Jung would call this projection. You place upon another person the responsibility to stabilize what only you can truly learn to hold. And this is why so many relationships become exhausting, not because people are unloving, but because they are being asked to carry a task that does not belong to them. No one can continuously prove your worth to you. No one can permanently soothe the fear you have not yet faced within yourself. This is where emotional maturity begins. Not when you stop needing people entirely, but when you stop making them responsible for your inner balance. Self-soothing is one of the most underestimated forms of strength. It means learning to stay with your own sadness, fear, disappointment, and uncertainty without immediately reaching outward to escape them. It means becoming the one who listens, the one who stays, the one who does not abandon yourself when your emotions become uncomfortable. It makes you free. Because a person who can sit quietly with their own pain does not panic when others pull away. They may still grieve, they may still long, but they do not collapse. They can feel loss without losing themselves. That is a profound shift. It is the difference between needing love to survive and being capable of receiving love without handing over your center. And perhaps that is the real lesson here. No one else can become your inner home for you. Complaining can feel like movement, but most of the time it is a way of remaining exactly where you are. After you have learned to sit with loneliness and stop demanding that others rescue you from your own emotions, another challenge appears. It is quieter, more socially acceptable, and far easier to justify. You may no longer be waiting for comfort in the same way, but you still return again and again to the same story. What happened to you? Who failed you? What was unfair? How difficult it has been? And the more often you repeat it, the more real it becomes. Carl Jung understood that this pattern is not harmless. He would say that repeated complaint is one of the ways the ego protects its familiar identity. As long as you remain inside the story of your injury, you do not have to step fully into responsibility for what comes next. The victim ego prefers narration to transformation. It would rather explain its pain than be changed by it. This is why complaint is so seductive. It gives the illusion of honesty while quietly feeding helplessness. Every time you repeat, "No one understands, nothing works. Why does this always happen to me?" you reinforce a position in which the world holds the power and you do not. Complaint becomes a ritual of self-confirmation. It tells the psyche again and again, "I am the one things happen to. I am the one who cannot move." Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That line matters here because chronic complaint is often unconscious. It feels natural, reasonable, even deserved. But beneath it is usually something deeper: self-pity, fear, resentment, or a refusal to let pain become responsibility. As long as that remains unconscious, it governs you. A woman once told me that after a painful betrayal by close friends, she spent months telling the story to anyone who would listen. At first, it gave her temporary relief, but over time she noticed something disturbing. She was not healing. She was rehearsing. The wound was not closing because she kept reopening it with language. One evening she asked herself a hard question. If there were no one left to tell this story to, would I still keep repeating it? The answer was no. That realization changed her. She began writing instead, not about what had been done to her, but about what she wanted to become because of it. Slowly, the same energy that had fed complaint began to feed change. That is the turning point. This does not mean you must deny pain or pretend not to suffer. Jung never suggested repression. The point is not to silence grief, disappointment, or anger. The point is to stop building your identity around them. Pain can be acknowledged without becoming your home. When you stop complaining, you do not become less human, you become more powerful. Because every sentence you no longer use to reinforce helplessness becomes energy available for action. And sometimes that action is very small: a decision, a boundary, a new habit, a different question. But even a small movement shifts the psyche. The moment you stop asking, "Why me?" and begin asking, "What now?" you have already begun to rise. One of the most difficult stages in any inner journey begins after you stop complaining and start acting. You begin doing the right things, you keep your promises, you continue your work, you carry yourself with more steadiness than before. And yet, something unsettling remains. No one seems to notice. No praise, no recognition, no visible sign from the world that your effort matters. And for many people, this is where the deeper test begins. Because hardship itself is not always what breaks a person. Often it is invisibility. It is the feeling that you are growing in silence, struggling in silence, changing in silence, and no one is there to bear witness to it. At that point, a very old hunger begins to stir again, the hunger to be seen, affirmed, and reflected back as valuable. Carl Jung understood that this hunger runs deep. The ego, especially in its earlier forms, wants proof. It wants confirmation from the outside that it is real, worthy, and on the right path. But he also understood that real psychological maturity begins when a person can no longer depend on external reflection as the primary source of worth. This is where self-validation becomes essential, not as a slogan, not as inflated self-esteem, but as a psychological necessity. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That line is frightening precisely because complete self-acceptance removes the last excuse for waiting. If you truly accept yourself, you are no longer allowed to postpone your worth until someone else notices it. You become your own witness, your own ground, your own confirmation. A woman once described to me what this looked like in her life. She had worked for years in a demanding office, often staying later than everyone else, carrying responsibilities no one fully saw. When recognition came, it usually went to someone louder, more visible, or more politically skilled. For a long time, this made her feel invisible. She thought the pain came from being overlooked. But eventually she realized something more subtle. The pain came from how much she needed outside acknowledgement in order to believe in the value of what she was doing. Once she saw that, something shifted. She began keeping her own record of what mattered. She wrote down what she had done well. She rewarded herself privately. She stopped working to be seen and began working in a way that allowed her to see herself. And strangely, that inner shift changed everything. Her effort no longer rose and fell with other people's attention. That is the movement Jung points toward. Self-validation is not arrogance. It is self-respect that no longer depends on applause. It is the ability to look directly at your own effort, your own integrity, your own becoming, and say, "This matters, even if no one else understands it yet." And when that center begins to hold, something remarkable happens. You stop performing your life for witnesses. You stop shaping your effort around recognition. You continue, not because someone is watching, but because the work itself has become true to you. That is a rare form of strength, to remain faithful without applause, to know your worth without needing it echoed back. And perhaps that is one of the clearest signs that the self is beginning to emerge. Failure becomes different once you stop treating it as proof that you are not enough. Before that shift, every fall feels personal. Every mistake seems to confirm an old fear. You try, you fail, and almost immediately the mind begins constructing a verdict. Maybe you are weak. Maybe you are behind. Maybe this is where your limit has finally been exposed. But Carl Jung would say that failure is rarely the final truth about a person. More often, it is the moment when hidden material rises to the surface. Failure reveals. It reveals where your identity is still fragile, where your pride is still attached, where your need for control has gone unexamined. It exposes the parts of you that still depend on success to feel real. And because of that, failure is not only painful, it is illuminating. Jung believed that what wounds the ego often serves the development of the self. The collapse itself may feel humiliating, but if you remain conscious inside it, the fall becomes information. It tells you what in you has not yet matured. It shows you where the old structure was too weak to carry what you were asking of it. In that sense, failure is not simply an interruption of your path. It is often the very event that forces your path to become more honest. A woman once told me about losing almost everything in a business she had built with someone she trusted. The betrayal was sharp, but what haunted her most was not only the loss. It was the feeling that she had misread everything. For months she carried shame, replaying the story as if the collapse meant she could no longer trust herself. But eventually, through quiet reflection, she began asking a different question. Not, why did this happen to me? But what did this expose in me? That question changed the entire experience. She realized she had ignored her intuition repeatedly because she wanted the partnership to work. The failure did not only break something external, it revealed an inner compromise she had not wanted to face. When she rebuilt, she did so differently, with less performance, less denial, and more truth. That is how failure becomes useful. Not because pain is good in itself, but because conscious pain can become transformation. There is a reason the phoenix remains such a powerful symbol. It is not merely reborn after destruction, it is reborn through destruction. Something must burn so that something deeper can live. Jung understood this pattern well. He knew that growth does not come from permanent success, but from what happens when the old identity can no longer survive the fire intact. And this is where many people misunderstand resilience. Resilience is not never falling. It is learning how to rise without turning the fall into your identity. Every failure gives you two options. You can use it as evidence against yourself, or you can use it as material. One path leads towards self-condemnation. The other leads toward consciousness. The first asks, what does this say about my worth? The second asks, what is this trying to teach me? That difference is everything. Because once you begin to treat failure as fire rather than verdict, you stop fearing it in the same way. You still feel the pain, you still feel the loss. But you no longer imagine that falling means you are finished. You begin to understand that sometimes the soul is strongest not when it avoids collapse, but when it learns to stand again without pretending it was never broken. There comes a final stage in this journey, and it is quieter than the rest. Not because it matters less, but because by this point, most of the dramatic noise has already fallen away. You have known loneliness. You have learned not to collapse when comfort is absent. You have seen the futility of complaint, the hunger for recognition, the lessons hidden inside failure. You have built some inward steadiness. And yet one longing may still remain, the longing to be fully understood. This is often the last attachment, the hope that somewhere, someone will finally see the whole of you, name your struggle correctly, and confirm that your inner life has meaning. But Carl Jung understood that this longing, though deeply human, can become another subtle way of placing your center outside yourself. Because the truth is, no one can fully witness the depth of your inner journey. No one has lived inside your contradictions, your fear, your effort, your becoming. Others may love you, they may support you, they may even recognize parts of you, but the deepest work of your life will always contain something solitary, and that is not a tragedy. It is a threshold. Jung once wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. That line captures the essence of this final movement. As long as you are still waiting for the world to explain you to yourself, some part of you remains asleep. But when you stop asking to be fully understood from the outside, your attention begins to return to the one place where real clarity can emerge, within. A painter once described this shift beautifully. After years of creating work shaped by trends, audience response, and the pressure to remain relevant, she became exhausted. Nothing she made felt alive anymore. So she left the city for a time, rented a small place near a lake, and stopped showing her work to anyone. She painted without posting, without asking, without performing. At first it felt pointless. Then slowly something returned. Her work became less polished but more alive, less strategic but more true. Months later, people responded to it more deeply than they ever had before, but by then, something had changed in her. She no longer needed the response in the same way. She had already found the deeper reward, contact with herself. This is the paradox Jung points toward again and again. The more deeply you stop seeking yourself outside, the more powerfully your life begins to carry something real. You become less explainable, perhaps, but more present, less dependent on recognition, but more grounded in truth. Like a lighthouse, you do not need to chase anyone in order to be seen. You stand where you are, rooted in your own light, and that light is what guides. To live this way is not to reject love or human connection. It is to stop asking them to do what only the self can do. It is to understand that peace, strength, and belonging are not gifts the world grants you after sufficient effort. They are states that become possible when you finally come home to yourself. And perhaps that is what all of this has been leading toward, not becoming superior, but becoming inwardly real. Because in the end, rising when no one is by your side is not about proving that you never needed anyone. It is about discovering that what you were waiting for someone else to awaken in you was already there, quiet, steady, and alive, asking only to be trusted. When you look back on the whole journey, something surprising begins to reveal itself. What once felt like abandonment was not always abandonment, and what once looked like emptiness may have been the beginning of a deeper form of life. This is the final integration, the place where all the separate lessons begin to come together. Loneliness was not there to erase you. It stripped away the noise so you could hear yourself. Emotional independence was not about becoming cold. It was about learning not to abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to rescue you. Letting go of complaint was not denial of pain. It was the refusal to build your identity around helplessness. Self-validation was not arrogance. It was the quiet decision to become your own witness. Failure was not proof of weakness. It was fire that revealed what in you was still unfinished. And learning to act without needing perfect emotion or total understanding was not hardness. It was maturity. Seen one way, all of these steps look separate. Seen more deeply, they are movements of the same return, a return from the outer world to the inner center. That is what Carl Jung was always pointing toward in one form or another. The real task of psychological life is not to become more pleasing, more efficient, more approved of, or more impressive in the eyes of others. It is to become more whole. And wholeness does not happen by accident. It happens when a person stops organizing their life around external signals and begins listening to the quieter authority within. This is why the journey of rising alone is so misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like loss, like isolation, like invisibility, like collapse. But inwardly, it may be the exact season in which the soul is gathering itself. The world grows quiet not to destroy you, but to remove what is no longer essential. The silence reveals what remains when applause is gone, when comfort is gone, when all the old mirrors no longer tell you who you are. And what remains, if you stay long enough, is not emptiness. It is presence, a deeper form of strength. Not the strength that comes from never breaking, but the strength that comes from no longer needing your worth to be held together by outside hands. This is the paradox at the center of the whole journey. When no one is there to lift you, you discover the part of you that can stand. When no one sees, you discover the part of you that still knows your life matters. When no one understands, you discover the part of you that no longer needs to be explained in order to be real. You stop asking it to confirm your value. You stop treating every silence as rejection and every hardship as a verdict. Instead, you begin to live with another kind of rhythm, quieter, clearer, more inwardly aligned. And that is how you rise when no one is by your side, not by becoming harder than life, but by becoming truer than your fear, but by remembering that the deepest source of strength, love, peace, and direction was never outside you. It was within you from the beginning, waiting for the silence to become deep enough for you to finally hear it. If you have made it this far, then perhaps something in you already recognizes the truth behind this journey. Not as an idea, not as a motivational phrase, but as something lived. Because there are seasons in life when no one stands beside you, no one explains the meaning of what you are going through, and no one comes to carry you through the dark. And yet somehow, you continue, you breathe, you endure, you rise one more time, not because it is easy, not because you feel constantly strong, but because something deeper in you refuses to disappear. That is the real message here. A person who rises when no one is there is not someone who feels no pain. They are not superhuman. They are not untouched by fear, loneliness, disappointment, or exhaustion. They feel all of it. But instead of letting those forces become their identity, they allow them to become part of their awakening. They let silence train them not to panic in their own presence. They let disappointment show them where they are still dependent on the world for confirmation. They let failure expose the places where old illusions still needed to fall away. And through all of this, something is slowly forged. Not perfection, something much more human and much more powerful. Authenticity. Carl Jung believed that the deepest task of life is not to become what others expect, but to become what is true. That is a difficult path because truth rarely arrives with applause. It usually comes quietly, through loss, through confusion, through the collapse of what once held you together. And yet that is often how the soul begins to take its real shape. So if you are in a season where no one is cheering for you, do not assume your effort is meaningless. If you are in a season where no one understands you, do not assume you are lost. If you are in a season where you must keep going without witness, recognition, or rescue, do not assume you are being abandoned by life. You may be in the very stage where your deepest strength is being born, because in the end, rising alone is not about becoming cold, detached, or self-sufficient in a rigid way. It is about discovering that your life can remain rooted even when the outer world grows silent. It is about no longer needing constant reassurance to keep walking. It is about becoming someone who can hold themselves with honesty, dignity, and steadiness in the absence of applause. And that changes everything. Because once you know how to stand with yourself, the world loses much of its power to shake you. Once you know how to listen inwardly, silence no longer feels like emptiness. Once you stop waiting to be saved, you begin to see that what you called weakness was often only unclaimed strength. So take this with you. You were never meant to spend your life waiting for the perfect support, the perfect witness, or the perfect moment of recognition. You were meant to become someone who could walk with your own light. And if this message reached you at the right time, share it with someone who may also need this reminder. And subscribe if you want to continue this journey inward, not toward becoming more impressive for the world, but toward becoming more real within it.